And we're live. I'm here with my friend Matt. Matt, how you doing?
Good, man. This intro's a banger.
Thank you. Because I relabeled this TPS. I want to make a new one where it's just all the scenes from Office Spaces when the guy's like, "You make those TPS reports yet?" And just make that the whole intro. But well, before we get into it, I want to say, loving all the content they're putting out. It's been great to see. I didn't get to watch the Tucker one today because I was at work when I saw I was going live, but I am looking forward to checking that one out.
Appreciate it, man. Yeah, we've had a lot of good energy over there. Got our live chats popping, and half the time, like it'll get distracting because I'm sitting here trying to do the show and I'm reading all these great comments that are coming in.
Yeah.
But yeah, we've been having a good time.
I mean, you and Cooper, it's great to have a co-host. You know.
Like
that's what I've noticed. Like, if you want to do a podcast by yourself, you have to be on the ball about getting guests consistently. I'm not, which is why this podcast goes through spurts of months of active, months of not being inactive. But it's when you get a co-host, you guys can just sit on an episode every week. It's awesome.
Yeah, definitely. Someone to fill in the dead air when your brain needs to catch up with what you're talking about.
Absolutely. But so today we're going to be doing the next chapter of Hilaire Belloc's Great Heresies, which is a fantastic book. Mainly because most things that nowadays that cover the heresy kind of cover like, how the heresy is around today or the theological side of the heresy. He really doesn't touch any of those. He just focuses on the history of how it came about, what happened during the time, how it was dealt with, its resulting effects. He doesn't really touch any like the theological issues of it, which is if you want to get a theological issue, critique of Protestantism, there's millions of videos and millions of books. But getting the historical side, where like in the Protestant chapter, he explains how it's like the main reason it stuck around is that all these dukes and German and Duke lords just stole land from the church and didn't want to give it back. So there was no reason to ever stop it. He understood in a pure economic. Also, Protestant countries just got rid of laws against usury, so they're able to grow faster. So there's economic benefits to maintain the heresy. And I'm like, yeah, it's actually a good account. That doesn't have to really deal with the theological side. And also, Islam was rising up again. So Germany had to try to settle the conflict with the Protestants so they could be prepared for the defense against Islam. And so I really enjoy the history side because I don't get really talked about a whole bunch anymore.
Yeah. I know basically nothing about him. I've heard his name a few times, and when he reached out and asked if I wanted to come on the show, he said to talk about the heresy of Mohammedism. And I was like, well, I know very little about Islam, relatively speaking. I know absolutely nothing about Belloc, so this will be fun.
There's a very specific reason I wanted to get you on for this one, and it's that Eastern Orthodoxy and Catholicism has both dealt with Mohammedism a lot. And so I thought it'd be fun to have, because it goes through the history of it. I thought it'd be really fun to have an Eastern Orthodox guy and a Catholic guy go through, because we can each kind of bring our own sides of the history to it, because I don't know a whole lot about the Eastern side dealing with it. I know a little bit about, Byzantium. I know a little bit about what happened in I'm also never quite sure where the divide is. Is Hungary Eastern Orthodox? Was Hungary like an Orthodox or Catholic side? I don't know.
I think it's a Catholic side. I think there's probably a relatively dynamic split between the two, but I've primarily associated Hungary with the Catholic side.
So we have Vlad the Impaler. Fantastic.
I think Vlad Romanian? He
was Romanian, yes. Romanian and Hungary. I'm thinking of was it Zahn Hunadi? I think he was Hungary.
Okay.
Yeah. It was Zahn Hunadi. Anyone listening, Ibrahim has a great book called Defenders of the West, when he goes through like the 5 great people who defended the West from the Islamic heresy. Duke Godfrey Bouillon, this El Cid, Richard Lionheart, St. Louis, all these great people. And he opening chapter, he just goes, "Yeah, this is a great man of history book. I like Carlyle. We're going forward from here." And I'm like, "Oh, cool! A modern historian just straight up saying I like Carlyle. Let's go."
Yeah, you don't hear very many of those.
No, it's straight up the quote. Open was quoting Belloc and quoting Thomas Carlyle. I'm like, this guy's different. He also got to start being popular because he translated. He was like the government translator for Arabic terrorist writings, so he knew all of the Arabic. So he readily quotes firsthand sources from both sides. And so it's really great points when it's like, and modern Western historians discount this great feat of strength from Duke Godfrey of cutting a horse in two, but Muslim sources also attest to it, so it's true. I'm like, cool.
Nice.
It's great. let's get into it. Well, actually, do you want to say anything about Mohammedism before we get into it?
So I've it's been interesting watching it rise lately, seeing the move toward it, and which I think is to a degree I see it as a bit of a white pill, because detaching it from the theological aspects itself, the rise in popularity of Islam in the West, especially among young men, indicates a desire for strong masculine leadership. I think that's the biggest. Like, people aren't deciding to become Muslim because of they're parsing through the theological intricacies of it. Like, they just see, strong, masculine, patriarchal. And so it's attracted to them for that reason. And he kind of, I was reading a little bit of it here before I connected with you, and he kind of addresses that, like, why it was popular to people, which is interesting. Like, it's like you're saying, kind of detaching from the theological debates about it, just being like this is the reason why people found it attractive. They're being crushed under loads of debt, and here comes someone saying that usury is evil. Yeah, we'll latch onto that idea. So to me, I do see a bright side in the guys who are moving in the Muslim direction. On the other hand, obviously, being an Orthodox convert, having an understanding of the conflicts that have happened between them, I know it's very typically the what you see on the internet now is the spats between Orthodox and Catholic, and I've gotten really tired of them. I just don't.
Me too.
I don't have any desire to engage in them. I've unfollowed basically all the like apologetic people and everything. I'm like, this is keep this stuff in your own house. Like, keep it, talk to your priest. Don't be like in these pissing matches online. It doesn't help anybody. It's not helping you guys. You're all pissed off at each other over. I mean, I think that there's a reason I'm Catholic, or there's a reason I'm Orthodox and not Catholic.
Hold on, I missed that. What happened?
I mean, I do say the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church.
There we go.
There's a reason why I'm Orthodox and not Catholic. I grew up like Protestant, Seventh-day Adventist, and believing the Catholic Church was the literal Antichrist. And then when I guess it was politics, it was monarchy that led me into appreciating apostolic succession and tradition. And so then I kind of had to reconsider, okay, let me look at the Roman Church again in this new light, and then look at the Orthodox Church. And I wound up taking the Orthodox side, so to speak. So there's a reason for that. Yet at the same time, I have a much greater affection now for Roman Catholics, and I don't think that there's anything to be gained from fighting amongst each other. If we want to go our separate ways, great. But like actively fighting, I don't think is productive.
Like, the only time I think I need to, like, I find the filioque and I find essence, energy, divine simplicity debates interesting if it's done by like theologians and priests. Right. These Twitter-anons who probably to be going to confessing more than they're on Twitter, I don't care what they have to say about it.
Me neither.
I don't care. If I have to see one more Palamas-Thomas debate, I shut up. I'm going to lose it. I don't care anymore.
Yeah, especially since a lot of them are just retarded. Like, it's like, no, you're wrong. Stop. No, shut up. You're wrong. My blood pressure doesn't need that.
I see like an Orthodox Catholic would say, Palamas was a heretic because he had this weird breathing thing that sounds Hindu, and Orthodox was like, Aquinas was fat. And I'm like, what is going on? Everyone just shut up. Please, for the love of God, just shut up.
I haven't heard that one. That's funny.
It pops up, I don't know why, but maybe because I follow about the Thomas, but like if a Orthodox guy says something about Aquinas being fat, it becomes a whole ordeal. Because I don't know why it's a whole
what's
ordeal.
The point supposed to be? Like that he was a sinner?
Yeah, that's the point. He was a glutton, therefore he was a sinner, therefore he couldn't be a good theologian. It's like, first of all, he was most likely autistic and absentmindedly ate. There's a difference.
Yeah, let me see your internet browser history. Then we
can talk. Exactly. Yeah. It's such a weird one. And it's like, I'm not even gonna get into it because it's incredibly frustrating. But anyway, back to the when it comes to Islam, for me, like, I see all these like Andrew Tate or Sneeko or these bigger names becoming Muslim. It's weird because on one hand, it's like, okay, people are becoming religious again, like in a mainstream sense, and that's interesting to see. But the religion they're going with is awful. I mean, I think Islam is, when I rank the worst religions, it's like it goes Hinduism, Islam, Judaism. I mean, it's a great. I'm gonna say I find. I think a quote from Aquinas here was he, Muhammad, seduced the people by promises of carnal pleasure to which the concupiscence of the flesh urges us. His teaching also contained precepts that were in conformity with his promises and gave free rein to carnal pleasure. And all this is not unexpected. He was obeyed by carnal men. And that's all I can think of now when I see Andrew Tate.
Yeah. Yeah, very much so.
It just gives credence to men to be the animals they want to be. Because many that want to be on a couch doing nothing or be animals, and it's only through the graces of God that we do not do those things.
Right. Yeah.
And Islam gives full credence to go into being a monster. I mean, this is a big point Abraham makes in his books on the Crusades. Islamic soldiers had a win-win policy. Either I win and get to rape all the women inside, or I die and get to have sex in heaven. Either way, I'm fucking by the end of the day. And that was like their motivation for wanting to fight. And I'm like, no wonder they were all carnal men. That's the win-win scenario of Islam.
Yeah. Yeah, very much. And I mean, so like now our good buddy 2-Bit Podcast, he's coined this term, the vengeful son. This is the spirit of the age. We had the tyrannical father of the pre-World War II era, then gave birth to the devouring mother of the post-World War II era, and now we're moving into the age of the vengeful son, who is you could think of him as like the negative connotation of him would be maybe like the brother of the prodigal son, the one who he resents his father for a number of reasons. The other archetype of it would be like the trust fund kid who his dad was away doing business, and his dad's maybe very great and successful and has paid for him to have all these great things in his life, but his dad was never there for him. And so then the kid grows up being raised by women and then resenting his father. And so the way he tries to get back at his father is by trying to beat him, trying to like destroy everything that his father built and replace it with what he wants to build. So there's the vengeful son cuts both directions. It has a positive manifestation and negative one. The way the world goes, we're going to see the negative manifestation of it very clearly. But I think that this move toward Islam that a lot of these guys are making is part of this vengeful son mentality that's growing.
Now, I like that. Vince was fun. Like maybe immediately what you said, I thought the prodigal son, the brother of that. So it's interesting to think about. Last thing I want to say on that before you get into the book is Western fatherhood is failing because no one can listen to Captain the Crate without getting emotional. Like it's just a tweet.
I'll retweet it. Yeah.
I mean, it's a great song. I mean, I can't listen to it. I love my dad. It brings up every little thing you could bring up, and it's a weird song like that. But that's
every time I hear it, I think of the Weird Al version of it.
There was a Weird Al version of it. Weird Al was like right before my time, so I only know like a few of his songs, but.
I'm trying to remember the words to it. He makes like eating like like Chinese restaurant feeding people cats joke in it. I can't remember the details of it though.
Weird Al. I wanted to from him like a fat and eat it. Oh, when Armored Paradise.
Yeah.
A banger. But let's get into it. Let me say the page for it, and then we can hop in. Excuse me. Anyone listening, EWTN has the entire book for free on the website if anyone wants to read it. There are a few grammatical errors in this copy for some reason, but we're just going to move past them. The Great and Enduring Heresy of Mohammed. It might have appeared to any man watching affairs in the earlier years of the 7th century, say from 600 to 630, that only one great main assault having been made against the church, Arianism and its derivatives, that assault having been repelled and the faith having won its victory, it was now secure for an indefinite time. Christendom would have had to fight for its life, of course, against outward unchristian things, that is, against paganism, the nature was of the high Persian civilization, to the eastward attack us in arms and try to overwhelm us. The savage paganism of the barbaric tribes, Scandinavian, Germanic, Slav, and Mongol, and the north and center of Europe would also attack Christendom and try to destroy it. The population subject to Byzantium will continue to parade heretical views as labor for their grievances, but the main effort of heresy at least had failed, so it seemed. Its object of the undoing of a united Catholic civilization had been missed. The rise of no major heresy need henceforth be feared, still less the consequent disruption of Christendom. I I would say he gave a great chapter on the Arian heresy, where he explains like no one really believed it, but the military people who wanted to still be pagan adopted it, and that's why the only reason it was a problem is because all the military people believed it.
Interesting.
And I found out when researching that the Arius wasn't even really a theologian; he was a hymn writer, and he snuck all of his theological points into hymns that became popular.
Very subversive.
Very subversive. But to this day, we still honor St. Nicholas for slapping the shit out of him. So
that's right.
Let's go St. Nicholas. By AD 630, all of Gaul had long been Catholic. The last of the Arian Zinwers in the garrison in Italy, Spain, had become Orthodox. The Arian Zinwers and garrison in northern Africa had been conquered by the Orthodox armies of the emperor. It was at this moment, a moment of apparently universal and permanent Catholicism, that there fell an unexpected blow of overwhelming magnitude and force. Islam arose quite suddenly. It came out of the desert and overwhelmed half our civilization. That is the point that Ibrahim makes. I think, and Bellick makes it a bit later, is that, like Plato said, all the nations around the Mediterranean were all frogs in the same pond. And you had the East-West split, was kind of split a little bit, and you had the Mohammedan split, which took the bottom half, and you had the Protestant split that further split Christendom. And so you had like a golden period where it was all one big Christian nation to being like 5 different splits now between a bunch of different people. And if you could have that, if that block could have been maintained, it would have been awesome.
It's interesting to look back at it to think about, like, generally speaking, we'll take, looking back in history, we'll take, like 1,000-year chunks, especially the further you get back. We'll take like 1,000-year chunks and we'll just sort of be like, oh yeah, those are all the same people, basically. But thinking about this from the perspective of, we're like, oh, first 1,000 years of the church, and we just sort of lump that all together in our head. And putting yourself in the mind of these people there, they're coming out of this time of great turmoil and everything, and now it's sort of like they're settling into this happy new age, which is kind of funny to think about. 1,500 years ago, people thinking, oh, there we go, we've reached the end of history, sort of. We're now going to settle into this period of stasis, and then immediately after that, it just gets plunged into this. But even then, when we talk about that, we're talking about that these are things that develop very quickly, quote unquote, over the course of 50 years or something like that, which almost an entire human lifespan.
Yeah, it is weird to think about. That's one thing I noticed when I was reading more about history. It's like a year can mean, like, if you're following a history like of one guy, 5 years past, you're like, that's a lot of time. Then you read, like, overall general history, and it's like 1,000 years past. Okay, it's still the same people roughly.
Right.
Just gonna move on.
You're right.
It's still the same Caesars or something. I'm gonna keep going. And it's like, yeah, what Caesars is though?
Right. Yeah. There's so you take the Roman Empire, but the Roman Empire had so many different like iterations and personalities and motivations and everything, that our minds just aren't capable of delving into this sort of detail, which I think is why history becomes like, there's no such thing as scientific history. History is necessarily just us telling stories to each other. We're just like throwing symbols at each other and interpreting those symbols and then forming a story in our head about them.
Absolutely.
When in reality, like, there's no way to verify any of this stuff, and we can't comprehend all of this like intense details. We just generalize in big swaths.
Well, that's why my historical methodology is whatever is cooler is going to be true, because we can't verify any of it. And so if I have to create a narrative, I want my narrative to be cooler. So of course, the Battle of Thermopylae only had 300 Romans, Spartans. That's right. Of course, George Washington chopped down the territory. Whoever one it was. Like, of course, the Vikings all had tattoos. No, why? Because it's cool, and I'm not lame. And if your worldview is lame, shut up. No one wants to hear a lame worldview. My worldview is cool, therefore it is true. Yours is lame, therefore false. Shut up. It's that simple.
I mean, and that's true. That's true even beyond the memeing. Like that's like the purpose of history. The purpose of studying history is understanding and using it to motivate you forward. So. Because it's not possible to have a true history, we're just dealing in subjective, I guess, like gradients.
Meta narrative versus meta narratives.
Of history. Right. So we want our history to be cool. And so because our history is cool, that means we're cool, which means we act like cool people, which means we do cool things. Exactly. So it becomes it's like a self-licking ice cream cone. We
simply tolerated the lactose and built Western civilization. Problem solved.
Yes.
No, this is actually why I'm a huge fan of Great Man of History. Not just because I think it's true, but because it is Napoleon, all he learned was Great Man of History. He was motivated entirely by Caesar, Alexander, all these great men. He was motivated by the fact those great men existed. He wanted to be like those great men. We don't motivate soldiers. Like, I talked to my like a niece today, friend of her family, babysitter her when she was young. She's now like 9. And I'm like, you learn anything cool in history? She went, we don't have history. We have social studies. I'm like, well, what's he learn in social studies? That Americans stole all the land from the Native Americans. They gave me a 5-minute spiel. And I'm like, I wanted to see, because they fucking lost. Right. But the mom was right there, and I didn't want to cause any problems. And he said her favorite president was Lincoln. And I'm like, I've lost a child. It's so over.
Well, at least her favorite president was a guy who put journalists in jail. Like, at least he had one thing going for him.
Yeah, one thing, and only one.
Of course, he wouldn't be her favorite president if she learned that. No,
of course not. Oh, if anyone learned half the shit about Lincoln, no one would like him.
Right.
But I think that's the biggest beef with modern history. Is like modern history in school just teaches you to hate your own culture. You know, it's just history is just now like it's just encourages this cultural suicide. And it's ridiculous. Like, no, I want when I teach history to someone, I want them to be motivated by how fucking awesome these people were.
Yeah, and you can't separate history from tradition. They're the same thing. I just tweeted just a minute ago that that tradition is memory at the social level. So if you're distorting people's historical perspective, it's the same thing as taking a person and wiping their memory, except you're doing it at the social level. So
that's a good point.
There's no possible way to construe this as anything other than just pure unadulterated evil.
Absolutely. That's actually a good point. I'm going to think about that after this, about history, tradition being like a living memory of history kind of thing. That's interesting, because that is one thing I noticed, like in Japan, after Princess Xavier was kicked out and a bunch of the Catholic priests were kicked out, but they still were Catholics in there. They really didn't have any of the doctrine, but they had the tradition, you know? And so they were able to maintain for almost 100 years the Catholic tradition just by living memory of like, this is what the last guy did, so I'm going to do the same exact thing because I don't know any different. And so even though there was no priest, they were able to closely maintain the liturgy without the Eucharist and just kind of go from there because of the tradition.
Where was this you're saying?
Japan.
Japan. This is the same thing happened in Alaska. They had... Yeah, I was just talking to my brother about this the other day. They had an Orthodox priest from Alaska come to his church, and he was talking about how, like, the persecution that Orthodox Christians were put through in Alaska by the Protestants was appalling. It was just straight up like taking them from their parents, forcing them to go elsewhere in the United States on like mission service or whatever, and outlawing languages and just this is just like the open hostile destruction of their religious culture. And they went, I think, 80 years or something like that without a priest. And when priests finally actually got to them, they flew there. Like, that was when it was from, I don't know, mid 1800s to the mid 1900s, something like that. And priests flew up there and landed there, and the entire community of thousands of people met them at the airport. And when they went in to do the liturgy, all of them had the whole thing memorized. They'd all just been doing it from memory because it had been passed on to them. They didn't have any books, they didn't have anything, but they would just do the liturgy from memory because they learned it from their parents who learned it from their parents.
That is interesting. That is what's one of the great things about being Catholic Orthodox, is that the tradition, the tradition and habits of how we do things teach us so much, you know? Like, I learned more about theology and going to my first mass than I did anything as a Protestant. Just witnessing that, I was like, yeah, okay, I get this now. I get this now. Oh, this makes sense. Oh, we're saying this because that was in the Bible here, and this was here, and that was there. Like, it all starts to click into place. And like, yeah, these Aquinas had a quote, and it was like, the little old lady at the church knows more about theology than the most well-trained doctors. And because they live it daily. You know,
well, this is like the faith without works is dead. You know, the Protestants, like, they fight all the time about faith versus works, and faith without works is dead. This is what it means. Like, believing all the doctrine, being able to argue it or explain it all, or having it all in your mind, contained in your mind, doesn't mean anything. Because if it's contained in your mind, then it's not being borne out in reality. So it has to be practiced. It's not just learned. It's practiced and behaved. And this is what belief is. This is what distinguishes belief from just thinking. Belief has an active component. So you can't be. This was the understanding that drove me directly to. I knew it was one of the two apostolic churches, it was this fact that there has to be a practice. It has to be a set of rituals that you participate in, because you're already participating in rituals. So it's not a question of whether or not you're going to participate in rituals. It's what is the basis and the historicity of the rituals that you're participating in. We're not just going to pick willy-nilly from any ritual. It's like these are the rituals that you must participate in, because when you do them, it's not that you're doing them because you're checking off tasks on a list. It's that the act of doing them divinizes you. And that was like when that clicked for me, the necessity of the ritual.
Yeah, that's one thing. I've gone back to my parents' Protestant church a few times, like Mother's Day or Christmas Eve services and stuff, and just seeing that there is really no pattern to any of it. It's just like, we're going to do worship, then praise and offering. Me and my foot's around the offering, my foot's around a little bit. There was no consistency. There's no liturgy. It was just songs, maybe offering, maybe some preaching, maybe this, and there's no consistency. I'm like, if the pastors weren't here, you guys couldn't do anything.
Right. Right.
I don't know if you saw the meme, but it was like it was some Protestants in Texas were doing a Super Bowl Sunday sermon where they had a field goal set up on the stage, and they had a Bible kickoff between the pastor and the pastor's wife, and it was
the Bible.
They kicked the Bible. I'm like, whoa, that's the weirdest Protestant I've ever seen. But it said, "Mom, can we have liturgy at home? Can we have some liturgy? We have liturgy at home," and it was the video of that. I remember seeing that. I'm like, what the fuck is happening nowadays? I mean, at least much as I can't stand Martin Luther, at least he had some cool lines. It had some cool sayings that actually honored Mary and all these other great things. You know, I mean, Calvin had nothing going for him, though. Fuck Calvin. Man,
like, so this is modern day Protestantism. It ranges from sola scriptura to kicking Bibles.
Yeah, it's honestly why I get mad when Protestants will say, like, I'll make a Protestant critique, and they'll say, well, that doesn't apply to me. I'm like, I can't single out because no many Protestant churches there are. How many Protestants are there? I can't single out every single person. So I'm going to just make a generic claim, and it's going to apply to most of you because most of them are wrong. Actually, all of them are wrong technically, but most of them are more wrong than others.
I just had to write this down. Sola scriptura versus sol a scriptura, like the sole of your shoe.
We're like a paragraph in 30 minutes. We gotta get moving. I knew this was gonna be a problem. Like I'll see you when I get Discord. I'm like, I would love to talk to Matt, but I only got 10 minutes. So let's get to it. Islam, the teaching of Muhammad, conquered immediately in arms. Muhammad's Arabian converts charged into Syria and won there 2 great battles. The first upon the Yarmouk of the east of Palestine and the highlands above the Jordan, the second in Mesopotamia. They went on to overrun Egypt. They pushed further and further into the heart of our Christian civilization, with all its grandeur of Rome. They established themselves all over northern Africa. They raided Asia Minor. They did not establish themselves there as of yet. They could even occasionally threaten Constantinople itself, at least a long lifetime after their first victories in Syria. They crossed the Straits of Gibraltar into Western Europe and began to flood Spain. They even got as far as the very heart of northern France between Poitiers and Tours, less than 100 years after the first victories in Syria. Interesting part here when they got to Spain. If you ever get a chance, the history of like the Spanish people revolt against the Muslims is fascinating. Because basically all the priests, all the bishops, priests, and either executed or converted, and all the dukes just kind of ran away, went to France, went to England, and one knight escaped to a mountain, and all the people who escaped to the mountain saw him, were like, he's the king now, right? He's the only knight here, we're gonna make him king. And then eventually Islam got tired of them. They marched like a couple thousand troops forward to try to take out all the mountain people. And the bishop who had converted tried to talk them out of the mountain, saying, how can you stand up to this? You're just a small seed. This is a mass army. And the guy said, the face of a mustard seed will destroy this army.
Ooh.
I know, right? Dude, the old knights of Christendom had some of the hardest fucking lines.
This is so everyone's all freaking out about the new what's it called, Sora or something like that, the new video AI. What I want to see is someone become an expert in like become their own production company and make a movie of that story. Wouldn't that be amazing,
dude? If they so many of the characters in that book from Ibrahim on the Descendants of the West, a Dracula movie, an actual Dracula, Vlad would be incredible. Duke Godfrey of Bouillon, dude. when Duke Godfrey of Bouillon, when they finally took Jerusalem and they needed to name someone king to stay there in Jerusalem, they asked all the knights, like, okay, what's wrong with your leader? This is a seal of confession, basically, what's wrong with your leader? We won't tell him. And the biggest critique against Duke Godfrey of Bouillon was that he stuck too long after Mass to pester the priest with his questions. And when he said, you want to be king of Jerusalem, he said, and I quote, I would not wear a crown of gold where my savior wore a crown of thorns, and named himself defender of the Holy Sepulchre instead.
Woo.
I know, right? Too. Every time I hear it, I'm like, that was a bad dude. That was amazing.
Wow.
Yeah, I do. I'm telling you, you ever get a chance, Abraham's books, both of them, Sword and Scimitar, Defenders of the West, incredible reads.
Okay.
They were ultimately swept back to the Pyrenees, but they continued to hold all of Spain except the mountainous northwestern corner. They held all of Roman Africa, including Egypt and all Syria. They dominated the whole Mediterranean, west and east, held its islands, raided its left-armed settlements, even on the shores of Gaul and Italy. They spread mightily throughout Hizar Asia, overwhelming the Persian realm. They were an increasing menace to Constantinople. Within 100 years, a main part of the Roman world had fallen under the power of this new and strange force from the desert. Such a revolution had never been. No early attack had been so sudden, so violent, so permanently successful. Within a score of years from the first assault in 634, the Christian Levant had gone. Syria, the cradle of the faith, and Egypt was Alexandria. The mighty Christian sea was in a lifetime half the roads and nearly half the territory of Christian Roman Empire was in the hands of the Mohammedan masters and officers, and the mass of the population was becoming affected more and more by this new thing. Mohammedan government and influence had taken the place of Christian government influence and were on the way to making the bulk of Mediterranean and the east and the south Mohammedan. We are about to follow the fortunes and the extraordinary things which still calls itself Islam. That is the exception of the Moors and simple doctrines which Muhammad had preached. As I've later described the historical origin of the saying, given the dates of its progress and its stages of original success. As I described the consolidation. Thank you. My tongue would not want to say that word. Consolidation of it, its increasing power, and the threat which it remained to our civilization. It nearly destroyed us. It kept up the battle against Christendom actively for 1,000 years, and the story is by no means over. The power of Islam may at any moment re-arise. That is one of Belloc's big points in like almost all his books. He brings it back like, no, Mohammedans are not done. Mohammedans are not done. They can at any moment come back to bite us. And I think we're actually starting to see it now through the mass Islamic immigration.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
And there's a lot to be said about that because there's a lot to be said because the Quran has some really weird, really honestly, the straight up evil takes about faking conversion and making peace when you're the weaker side, and to the moment you're the stronger side, breaking all your vows. Like the moment they have the power to do anything, it's gonna be awful.
That sounds very sounds a lot like the other worst religion you mentioned.
Yeah, I mean. This is a regular occurrence. Christians would take a Muslim country or Muslim city, and a lot of Muslims would convert until Muslims were outside the gates, and the Muslim Christian converts would immediately go back to Islam and start attacking Christians on the street and helping them from the inside. This happened regularly because Islam says you can proclaim a false religion as long as you hold true to Allah in your heart. So you can never actually fully trust an Islamic convert. Because they say as long as you hold true to your heart, it's all that matters. So you could have there were multiple generations of Christians, quotation marks, who were secretly Mohammedans. And the moment they came a chance for them to rebel against Christians, they rebelled and started raping priests and nuns. And that was a common occurrence throughout the Crusades. It's honestly like I made a joke like the existence of Islam disproves libertarian ethics. You can't. It disproves argumentation ethics. You can't trust them.
That's very interesting. Thinking about that in terms of the what's the thing I'm looking for here? The way that Islam is similar to Calvinism in that they're not comfortable with like second order energies. It's only they're monergistic. It's interesting thinking about that, like being there's this divorce between your actions and your heart, and thinking about that in the context of Calvinists and predestination. It's kind of a half-baked thought. It was what I was thinking of as you were talking about that.
Belloc gets into it later about the striking similarity between Mohammedanism and Calvinism.
Yeah,
this is a great chapter, honestly. He has a whole book on the Crusades, which was also very entertaining. But before following that story, we must grasp two fundamental things: the nature of Mohammedanism. Second, the essential cause of its sudden and, as it were, miraculous success over so many thousands of miles of territory and so many millions of human beings. Mohammedanism was a, that is, the essence was a, why is this a semi? Mohammedanism was a, that is the essential point to grasp before going any further. It begins as a heresy, not as a new religion. It was not a pagan contest with its church. It was not an alien enemy. It was a perversion of Christian doctrine. Its vitality and endurance soon gave it the appearance of a new religion, but those who were contemporary with its rise saw it for what it was. Not a denial, but an adaptation, and the misuse of the Christian saying. It differed from most, but not all heresies in this: that it did not arrive within the bounds of the Christian church. The chief heresiarch, Muhammad himself, was not, like most heresiarchs, a man of Catholic birth and doctrine to begin with, but sprang from pagans. That actually might be incorrect. I think later sources figured out that he was an Arian. That he might have been an Arian, so that's why he denied the Trinity. He was a very big Unitarian.
What I heard was that he was like he studied under some like rogue Arian monks or something.
Yeah, that's what I've heard.
Along those lines.
Yeah. Again, this book is also written. This book was written, I think, before World War II. Like it's decently old. So there might be a few points where it's kind of like. Actually, I wanted to ask you, what was there like an Eastern Orthodox presence in England in the 20th century? Like I imagine there had to be at least a few, but were there like any real presence there? Any intellectuals out of that area, or?
I don't. In the 20th century, I'm not sure. Yeah. I know there definitely are now. I don't know if there was a substantial presence. I completely don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either. I'd be very interested to see if there are, because the 20th century produced some really good intellectuals and some really bad ones. But
there were a number in the East there's one guy, just his name just completely escaped my mind. He's French. Yeah, I can't remember.
But that what he taught was in the main Catholic doctrine. Oversimplified, it was the great Catholic world on the frontiers of which he lived, whose influence was all around him, and whose territories he had known by travel, which inspired his conviction. He came of and mixed with the degraded idolaters of the Arabian wildernesses, the conquest of which had never seemed worth the Romans' while. So true. He took over very few of those old pagan ideas, which might have been native to him from his descent. On the contrary, he preached and insisted upon a whole group of ideas which were peculiar to the Catholic Church and distinguished it from the paganism which had conquered in the Greek and Roman civilization. Thus, the very foundations of his teaching was the prime Catholic doctrine, the unity and omnipotence of God, the attributes of God he took over in the main form Catholic doctrine, the personal nature and the all goodness and timelessness, the providence of God, his creative power as the origin of all things, and his sustenance of all things by his power alone. The word of good spirits and angels of evil spirits and rebellion against God was part of his teaching, was the chief evil spirit such as Christendom had recognized. Muhammad had preached with insistence a prime Catholic doctrine on the human side, the immortality of the soul and its responsibility for acts in this life, coupled with the consequent doctrine of punishment and reward after death. If anyone sets down those points that the Orthodox Catholicism has in common with Mohammedanism, and those points only, one might imagine it would. If one went no further, then there should have been no cause for quarrel. Muhammad would almost seem, in his aspect, to be a sort of missionary, preaching and spreading by the energy of his character the chief and fundamental doctrines of the Catholic Church among those who had hitherto been degraded pagans of the desert. He gave to our Lord the highest reverence, and to Our Lady also, for that matter. On the day of judgment, another Catholic idea was he taught. It was our Lord, according to Muhammad, who would be the judge of mankind, and not Muhammad, the mother of Christ, Our Lady, the Lady Miriam, was ever for him the first of womankind, as far as even got the earliest feathers, some vague hint of her Immaculate Conception. Here, I do have to cut and read the footnote he gives. Let me see if I can find it real quick in my book. Here it is. It was from this fact that certain French writers opposed to the Catholics, opposed to the Church, got the enormous blunder that the Immaculate Conception came to us from Mohammedan sources. Gibson, of course, copied his masters blindly here, as he always does and repeats in his absurdity of his decline and fall.
He doesn't mince words.
No, Belloc never minced words. When he would go after someone, he went after them. I can't remember. I'm saying one of the good ones. There's many of them. He had a bit of a temper. Like he apparently hurt his back in mass one time, and some guy thought he was new and was like, "You're supposed to stand at this part." And he just turned and went, "Go to hell," and then sat back down. Like he had a very immediate temper.
So that was his cross to bear.
Yes, but also he was apparently friendly enough to hitchhike across America from New York to California to go see his girlfriend.
Whoa, interesting.
Dude, he hitchhiked across America, and here's how he would get places to stay. He would say, "Hey, I'm a poet and an artist. I'll draw a portrait of your family, I'll write you some poems and sing you some songs. Can I stay here tonight?" And so he basically has a bard traveled his way across America.
Wow, that's really cool.
Mm-hmm. He also has a book called The Path to Rome, which is probably his most popular book, where he walked from, I think it's Sussex. He walked from Sussex all the way to Rome, and in 4 days, refusing to take any train, horse-drawn carriage, or stay in a hotel. He wanted to sleep under the stars and walk on the mountains the whole way, and make it there for a certain time of mass to see the Pope.
Huh.
And in his book, he has always it's just his thoughts he wrote down as he was walking, and in the sketches he drew of the mountainsides. And it's like a very early travel blog, and it's really fun.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, he was best friends with Z.K. Chesterton, and they had some very funny stories. Like apparently they were going to do a walking tour, and they both forgot their wallets, and so they decided to sleep outside and not sour. And it was just not going to sour, not going to stay at a hotel, and just sleep outside. And we're going to get home. And while walking, they passed by Chesterton's like summer home, and Chesterton dipped in to go grab a few things and bumped into some famous American author who just retired to the same neighborhood. So Chesterton is also just talking about writing and also sipping all that stuff. And Belloc kicks the doorway and goes, "I know you're sour, you fat fuck." And then saw the American author was like, "Oh, hello, good sir, nice to meet you." And they just started on, and then they went on me to be like, "Hey, George Bernard Shaw lives 2 miles down. Let's go see his house." And they all just showed up at his house smelling like shit and demanded to see him.
That's great.
There's so many great Belloc stories. Belloc and Chesterton had some, because that time period in England was just a very interesting time period. So they had some very fun stories. Okay. But the center point where the new heresy struck home was a mortal blow against Catholic tradition was a full denial of the incarnation. Muhammad did not merely take the first steps towards this denial as Arians and their followers had done. He advanced a clear affirmation, full and complete against the whole doctrine of an incarnate God. He taught that our Lord was the greatest of all prophets, but still only a prophet, a man like us a man. He eliminated the Trinity altogether. During the Crusades, the Muslims often called Christians pagans, and they justified a lot of the war by saying they are wiping out paganism.
Interesting.
And I really do object to the whole they liked Mary and Jesus, because most of the Muslims during the time would spit on a cross or destroy images of Mary, or often wipe their asses with a crucifix. This is mock Christians. So I really don't think they take that seriously. And if you ever hear a Muslim talk about Jesus or Mary, it's like when you hear a liberal try to say, "Oh, I like someone at church." Like, you know the bullshit in you. You just know you're lying. That's like when I saw a Western Hindu, like Vivek uses God instead of Brahman for his belief. I'm like, no, you shut up. You don't mean the same thing. Or when a Muslim guy uses God instead of Allah, like, you don't mean the same thing. Are you trying to trick me? Shut up. With that denial of the incarnation went the whole sacramental structure. He refused to know anything of the Eucharist and its real presence. He stopped the sacrifice of the Mass and therefore the institution of a special priesthood. In other words, he, like so many other lesser heresiarchs, founded his heresy on simplification. Catholic doctrine was true, he seemed to say, but it had become encumbered with false accretions. I wonder who else says that? It had become complicated by needless man-made additions, including the idea that its founder was divine and the growth of a parasitical caste of priests who battered on a late and maddened system of sacraments which they alone could administer. All those corrupt accretions must be swept away.
It's just point by point is the Reformation.
He has a lot to say about the Reformation.
I could imagine,
and he gets very fiery in it. He's fun. There is just a very great deal of common between the enthusiasm and what's Muhammad's teaching attacked the priesthood, the Mass, and the sacraments, and the enthusiasm was Calvinism. the central motive force of the Reformation did the same. As we all know, the new teachings relaxed the marriage laws, but in practice, this did not affect the mass of his followers who still remained monogamous. It made divorce as easy as possible, for the sacramental idea of marriage disappeared, and insisted upon the equality of man, and then necessarily had the further factor in which it resembled Calvinism, the sense of predestination, the sense of fate, of what the followers of John Knox were always calling the immutable decrees of God. Muhammad's teachings never developed among the mass of his followers or in his own mind a detailed theology. He was content to accept all that appeared to him in the Catholic scheme and to reject all that seemed to him and to so many others of his time too complicated or mysterious to be true. Simplicity was the note of the whole affair, and since all heresies draw from the strengths of some true doctrine, Mohammedanism drew its strengths from the true church doctrines which it retained, the equality of all men before God, all true believers are brothers. It zealously preached the throne and the paramount claims of justice, social and economic. Now, why did this new, simple, energetic heresy have its sudden overwhelming success? One answer is that it won battles. It won them at once, and as we shall see when we come to the history of the saying, but winning battles could not have made Islam permanent or even strong had it not been a state of affairs awaiting some such message and ready to accept it. Both in the world of Hizr and the Greco-Roman world of the Mediterranean, but especially of the latter, society had fallen, much as our society has today, and to a tangle wherein the bulk of men were disappointed and angry in seeking a solution to a whole group of social strains. Sounds like today. There was indebtedness everywhere, the power of money and consequent usury. There was slavery everywhere. Society reposed upon it, has all reposed upon wage slavery today. There was a weariness and discontent with theological debate, which for all its intensity going out of touch with the masses. There lay upon the free men already torturous debt a heavy burden of imperial taxation, and there was the inherent existing central government interfering with men's lives. There was the tyranny of the lawyers and their charges. To all this, Islam came as a fast relief and a solution of strain. The slave who admitted that Muhammad was a prophet of God and the new teachings had, therefore, divine authority, ceased to be a slave. The slave who adopted Islam was henceforth freed. The debtor who accepted was rid of his debts. Usury was forbidden. The small farmer was relieved, not only of his debt, but of his crushing taxation. Above all, justice could be had without buying it from lawyers. All this, in theory, the practice was not nearly so complete. Many a convert remained the debtor, many were still slaves, but whether Islam conquered there was a new spirit of freedom and relaxation. Anything to add?
Yeah, it's interesting that that these great heresies rise as a judgment against the church. The church's lack of responsibility and lack of life, like as people get lax and as the church's influence wanes in the society, then it creates the door for these kinds of heresies. The same thing is true today. Like the everything that we're seeing today, you can look at it as you can do this on the male female axis as well. That men. This is the whole thing. The whole thing with Andrew Tate, that it's a gynocracy and all the women they suck and they're bad and they run all these institutions, and this is just a judgment of men. Like men are the ones who allowed this to happen. In the same way, the church is when the church is lax, when the church is not faithful, then the heresies arise because people don't have the church to turn to. The church is not a viable option to them for one reason or another. And so they go looking for something else, and they find it in opportunities like this.
Yeah. Like when a Protestant wants to bring up, like, say, the misuse of, what was it called? Was it in Confession? It was, the
indulgences.
Indulgences. Yeah. Bring up misuse of indulgences or any number of priests who are failing. I'm like, yeah, that was definitely a thing that happened. It sucked. It was bad. The church the church agreed that they were going to try to fix it under Luther, and they later did fix it with the whole Inquisition. But like they didn't give the church a chance, and that was like the problem. The church was too slow to act, and that's kind of a constant theme, I think, of both sides. Is that it's always kind of a slowness to act. I mean, this is a big thing with the Albigensian heresy, is the church really wanted to solve it peacefully, so they waited a little too long and gave way to Protestantism. And it's like, yeah, I get it. You're priests. You don't necessarily want to stop pulling out swords and killing everyone who disagrees with you. But it comes a point when you have to pull out a sword and kill everyone who disagrees with you.
Yeah.
But when that point is, I don't know. I'm a layperson. I'm not going to say when that point is. That's not for me to call. Just when the Pope says the word, I'm grabbing my sword and going after the Mohammedans. I found a mosque in my town. Funny enough, it's right behind the vape shop, and it's like connected buildings. And I was looking at there's the remittance of sins still applies to those who die in the fight against Islam. I got some plans here real quick.
You're gonna get your plunder.
I'm gonna see the vapes. That's it. I'm gonna wait. They almost killed me though. I got a new one that's actual, like, not disposable, an actual vape, and they gave me the wrong kind of nick. I needed a salt nick and not the other kind, and so I almost got nicotine poisoning.
Oh, jeez.
And so again, I don't trust Easterners. I am a Westerner, and I really don't trust the Easterners. Eastern Orthodox is as far east as I'm gonna go. That's my outer limit of a civilized society. It was a combination of all these things: the attractive simplicity of the doctrine, the sweeping away of clerical and imperial discipline, the huge immediate physical advantage of freedom for the slave, and the riddance of anxiety for the debtor, the crowning advantage of free justice under a few simple new laws easily understood that formed the driving force behind the astonishing Mohammedan social victory. The courts were everywhere accessible to all without payment, and giving verdicts which all could understand. The Mohammedan movement was essentially a Reformation, and we can discover numerous affinities between Islam and Protestant reformers on images, on the mass, on celibacy, etc. John Calvin once said the Pope and Muhammad are two horns of the Antichrist. And oftentimes when the Muslims started attacking Catholic nations, Protestants would join their side. I'm like, wow, that pissed me off. Like, there's a lot of history about the Islam stuff that really just makes you angry. Whether it's the failure of the West to act in protection of the East, whether it's the failure of the East to send troops, whether it's the failure of Protestants to back their own country, whether it's just the insane, incredible, awful crimes that Muslims have committed against the church and the nuns and the priests and everything. I do want to say, on the point of simplicity here, I think it was the third to last emperor of Constantinople, Emmanuel or something. He was sent over as basically a ward of the Mohammedans, because they maintained peace, and they treated it like a stun exchange. So the prince of Byzantium lived with the Mohammedans for a while, and they were constantly trying to convince him to be a Mohammedan. And he had the quote, which was, "Show me anything new that Muhammad added, and I'll show you lies, and I'll show you evil." Which is like, I'm paraphrasing it, but it was like something along those lines. But it was a great quote. Like, yeah, anything. The core tenets are true because they are a heresy. It's all the Christians and everything that is added that is evil because it's from Muhammad. The marvel seems to be not so much that the new emancipations of other men, much as we might imagine communism to sweep over our industrial world today, but that there should still have remained, as they remain for generations, a prolonged and stubborn resistance to Mohammedanism. There you have it. I think the nature of Islam and its first original blaze of victory. We had just seen what was the main cause of Islam's extraordinary rapid spread: a complicated and fatigued society, and one burden was the institution of slavery, one moreover in which millions of peasants in Egypt, Syria, and all of the East, crushed with usury and heavy taxation, were offered immediate relief by the new creed, or rather the new heresy. Its note was simplicity, and therefore it was suited to the popular mind in a society where hitherto a restricted class had pursued its cause in sociology and government. That is the main factor that accounts for the sudden spread of Islam after its first armed victory over the armies rather than the people of the Greek-speaking Eastern Empire. But this alone would not account for two other equally striking triumphs. The first was the power of this new heresy sowed of absorbing the Asiatic people of the Near East, Mesopotamia, and the mountain land between it and India. The second, the rose and the splendor of the Caliphate. This is the central Mohammedan monarchy, and the generations coming immediately after the first Creeper victory. The first of these points, the spread over Mesopotamia and Persia and the mountains land towards India, was not as the case of its sudden successes in Syria and Egypt due to the appeal of simplicity, freedom from slavery, and relief of debt. It was due to a certain underlying historical character in the East, which has always been influenced in society and continues to influence today. The character is a sort of natural uniformity. There has been inherent in it from times earlier than any known historical record, a sort of instinct for obedience to one religious head, which is also the silver head, and a general similarity of social culture. When we talk of age-long struggle between Asia and the West, we mean by the word Asia all that spreads population in the mountain land beyond Mesopotamia towards India, its permanent influences upon the Mesopotamian plains themselves, and its potential influence even the highlands and seacoasts of Syria and Palestine. The struggle between Asia and Europe swings over a vast period like a tide ebbing and flowing for nearly 1,000 years from the conquest of Alexander to the coming of the Mohammedan reformers. The tide had set eastward. It is that his Western influences, Greek and then Greek and Roman, had flooded the debatable land for a short period of about 2.5 to 3 centuries. Even Mesopotamia was superficially Greek in its governing class. At any rate, then Asia began to flood back again westward. The old pagan Roman Empire and the Christian Empire which succeeded it, and which was governed from Constantinople, were never able to hold permanent land beyond the Euphrates. A new push from Asia westward was led by Persians and Persians, which last were a division of the Persians. Never heard of them. Not only kept a hold of Mesopotamia, but were able to carry out raids into Roman territory itself, right up to the end of that period. In the last few years, before the appearance of Mohammedanism, they had appeared on the Mediterranean coast and had sacked Jerusalem. Now, when Islam came with its first furious victorious cavalry charges springing from the desert, it powerfully reinforced the tenacity of Asia to reassert itself. The uniformity of tempo, which is the mark of Asiatic society, responded at once to a new idea of one very simple personal form of government, sanctified by religion, and the ruling was a power theoretically absolute from one center, the caliphate. Once established at Baghdad, Baghdad became just what Babylon had been, the central capital of one vast society, giving it its tone to all the lands and the Indian borders of Egypt beyond. That is the interesting point about Islam, is that from the Turks to the Ottomans, they very easily centralize about one person. The West never really has that. Besides maybe Charlemagne, the West has a hard time centralizing around one person.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to guess it purely has to do with climate. It's just too good in the West to want to ever listen to somebody. And if you don't listen to someone, you're probably gonna die. Like, it's purely a climate thing, I was saying. I was trying to take a guess.
Yeah, that's interesting. I was trying to think of, as you're reading along there, I was trying to think of why that would be, like what it would be that would distinguish the East from the West in that particular way. And I was trying to think of if it has something to do with Genghis Khan, maybe, and like his impact. But he's even talking about he's going back pretty far with identifying that. I guess that like social pattern. So I would read an entire book about that particular subject alone. Yeah.
If I had to say, like, I could say like early Hindu philosophy, most super early Eastern philosophies deny reality in favor of some like imagined thing, like reality is just the mind of Brahman, or reality isn't real, it's all in the mind. And maybe because then you don't really care as much about your own self. You care about the society as a whole because it's much more of an extrinsic thing because nothing of it's real. I don't know.
Maybe it's a Plato Aristotle thing.
Maybe it's Plato. They're all Eastern philosophers until Muhammad lacked this a seos. They lacked the first principle.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe maybe when you lack a first principle, it's easier to fall behind the first principle being some king or some caliphate.
Yeah. Whereas if you have a first principle, then it becomes like a debate over who's following the first principle, which is it moves everything to like a second order.
Yeah. Thing. That's something I actually want to think about more now when I read history. Like, why is it that the Asian people so easily fall behind one person?
Mm-hmm.
He wrote a lot of history books, and he has the very same style for all of them, which makes him easy to read.
Yeah, it's very readable.
Yeah, he was an essayist and not really a historian, so he has a very good way of writing and good way of reading. He has a whole essay on why he hates them. And he puts like capitalizes THEM, capitalizes it, and it goes into a whole series. It's like the most racist hatred you ever read about like a person. And it gets to the very end. It's like, I hate their fur and paw and long tails and whiskers. Like, is he talking about fucking cats? He has a whole essay where the punchline is he hates cats. And you see he's writing about, is this Jews, just Mohammedans, just Hindus? Who are you writing about, Belloc? And it's cats. He hates cats. He had
that's funny.
Belloc had a very tragic life. His wife died. Then his son died. First son died in World War One. Second son died in World War Two, and his daughter married a Protestant. And that seemed to be the one that upset him the most. He is a fascinating figure, honestly.
He's a grumpy old bastard.
But also, he was his most popular book was his poetry. He wrote children's poetry.
Huh.
They were called Cautionary Tales for Children. One of the titles is Alice, who told lies and was burned to death. They're very like, she told lies and this happened and she died. All of them end with the child dying.
That's great.
He was something else.
No kidding.
But even more remarkable, I think we'll just get like halfway through it and then call it, because we're already gone an hour, so we'll kind of just maybe go halfway through it and then call it.
Okay, sounds good.
But even more remarkable than the flooding of all Near Asia with Mohammedanism in one lifetime was the wealth and splendor and culture of the new Islamic empire. Islam was in those early centuries, most of the 7th and 8th and 9th, the highest material civilization of our Occidental world. The city of Constantinople was very wealthy and enjoyed a very high civilization, which radiated over dependent provinces. Greece and the seaboard of the Aegean and the uplands of Asia Minor, but it was focused on the imperial city. The greater part of the countryside's culture was on the decline in the west. It was notoriously so. Gaul and Britain, and in some degree Italy, and even the valley of the Danube. Danube, thank you. You hear the word, but you never actually read it. And I'm like, Danube. Fell back towards barbarism. Never became completely barbaric, not even Britain, which was the most remote, but they were harried and impoverished and lacked proper government from the 5th century to the early 11th, say AD 450 to AD 1030. We're in the period which we call the Dark Ages of Europe, in spite of Charlemagne's experiment. I would say, because he's an older historian, he does still use the Dark Ages, but he always seems to put it in quotation marks. Like, he doesn't really have the arguments or historical data yet to say here's why it's wrong, like Tom Woods had, but he still was like, this doesn't seem right. Someone to put it in quotation marks. So much for the Christian world of the time, against which Islam was beginning to press so heavily, which had lost to Islam the whole of Spain and Central Islands and coast of the Central Mediterranean as well. Christendom was under siege from Islam. Islam stood up against us in dominating splendor and wealth and power, and that was even more important, with superior knowledge in the practical and applied sciences. Islam preserved the Greek philosophers, the Greek mathematicians, and their works, the physical sciences of the Greek and Roman earlier writers. Islam was also far more lettered than was Christendom. In the mass of the West, most men had become illiterate. Even in Constantinople, reading and writing were not as common as they were in the world governed by the Caliph. One might sum up and say the contrast between Mohammedanism, the Mohammedan world, and the early centuries of the Christian world, was its threat to overwhelm, was like the contrast between modern and industrialized states and a backwards, half-developed state next door to it. The contrast between modern Germany, for instance, and its Western neighbor. The contrast is not as great as that, but the modern parallel helps us to understand that for centuries to become, Islam was to remain a menace. Even though Spain was reconquered in the east, it became more than a menace and spread continually for 700 years. Even if it had mastered the Balkans and the Hungarian plain, and all but occupied Western Europe itself, Islam was the one heresy that nearly destroyed Christendom, through its early material and intellectual superiority. I have beef here when people say intellectual superiority, and here's my beef. Every great Islamic philosopher was either executed or had to burn his own book because they went against Islam, which is why Islam eventually adopted the two truths view, where they like there's truths of science and truths of religion, and they contradict, they're both true at the same time. They completely support the law of non-contradiction. And so I refuse to say someone is intelligent for throwing out the most basic law of logic.
Yeah.
I refuse to accept that. He might be good at math, but if you throw out the most basic law of logic, you got to be an idiot in some way. And it's happened to be correct sometimes. And I refuse to call any of those Islamic philosophers great, because they all were getting closer to the truth that was closer to the Christian view and the 9 Islamic views, but then they all kind of stopped and burned their books or were killed because they were going away from the Islamic view. And so they didn't have any conviction, so I refuse to praise them.
I wonder what it was that caused their I mean, like I've heard of this for a long time. I think it's pretty well documented that for a long time, a lot of scientific exploration and like whatever, this is like before you had even the context of the concept of like a scientist, so to speak. But whatever the pretext for that scientist archetype existed mostly in the East and within the Caliph. And I wonder what that was. Why was that not something that was as prominent within Christendom at the time? What were the social factors leading to that? It's not a leading question. I genuinely have no idea.
If I had to guess, it'd be like there was more unified, and when you have less, we don't have to worry about your country next door invading you or having to be thrown into a war. You can devote your time to the sciences.
Mm-hmm.
But it is interesting. It's a very interesting period to study, honestly. And also I was thinking the fact that Islam had so much to do with how it's really just evolved because Muhammad said it's okay to marry your first cousin. So there was a lot of inbreeding, and it slowly just evolved into being what they are today in the Middle East. But also every time the sciences got closer to a truce, and if it began to contradict anything in Islam, they had to say, well, it's true, but not as true as this. And so the aggregations of truths, and they can be completely contradictory, but both still true. And so once they had that problem, they just started really throwing out the sciences. And so they really, a lot of the, if they didn't have a few things, they probably would have skyrocketed. And the only reason the West had any advantage is because we had heavy armor and shields, which they didn't use, and we later got better cannons and guns than they had. And that's why we beat them back so often. We eventually got better at technology because they began to, through the inbreeding and because of their weird view of the truce, they begin to slowly destroy or fall behind or even go backwards in the technology.
It's funny, they don't have second order energy, but they have second order truth.
There's a lot of interesting things to study about it, from a historical, from theological, to the Protestant similarities, to how it appeared to a cultural side. There's a lot to be studied about the Islamic heresy. This is why I really love this history chapter, because it's like he just kind of hinted at the theological stuff, a hint at the science stuff, but he really just goes, here's the overall history, go from there.
And there's something to be said too for based on what you were saying a minute ago, that there's something to be said for the value of maintaining military superiority over the land of your people. That if you can maintain military superiority over the land of your people, then your people can exist in peace, which means they can start doing things like scientific innovation and study. And so it's like, it's a positive Christian duty to be able to maintain military superiority over your land. Absolutely.
There's so many lessons to be learned from this time period.
Mm-hmm.
Especially listening to Heresy. This is why I think, again, I recommend this book to everybody, even if they're Protestant. Like, you can skip a Protestant chapter, but read this chapter on the Heresy of Modernity. That's a fire chapter.
And he wrote this in like the first half of the 20th century.
Mm-hmm. He was. People want to praise Belloc and Chesterton, and like they were great in the time, but they've gotten better because everything they said came true. But just imagine how great they would be today. Just imagine now. That's so great. Oh, let's get back to it. Now, why was this? It seemed inexplicable. Oh, I'm going to finish my Tic Tac. I do my best to keep food off my desk when I'm podcasting because I will just start snacking. So I've been thinking about it. And I forgot I moved the Tic Tacs away, and so I keep popping them in. Now, why was this? It seemed inexplicable when we remember that the uncertain and pretty personal leaderships, the continuous changes of local dynasty, the sifting foundation of the Mohammedan effort. The effort began with the attack of very few thousand desert horsemen, who was much drawn by desire for loot as by their enthusiasm for new doctrines. These doctrines had been preached to a very sparse body of nomads, boasting but very few permanently inhabited centers. They had originated in men remarkable, indeed, for the intensity of his nature, probably more than half convinced, probably also a little mad, and one who never shown constructive ability. Yet Islam conquered. I would say, you know what Muhammad looked like, most likely?
No.
A white guy.
Really?
Yeah, there's like a very early account of what he looked like, and it was describing him as having pale skin as white as snow, kind of thing, like very pale skin that reflected the sun. And I'm like, I mean, he wasn't really, we don't know where he's from, but we know he went to the deserts. But if he was, trained by, an alien monk or an alien guy, it stands reason he might have been more from a western side of things or a northern side of things, I guess, and have more of a white complexion.
Interesting. So he could have been a pure European for all we know.
And so that's one of the reasons why I think, honestly, that's one thing I really find interesting is the Mohammedans insisted on iconoclasm.
Yeah.
They refused to do images. I mean, that is one. It led to them creating probably the most beautiful written language on earth. But it's also, they were very early in that whole iconoclasm thing. It wasn't to the Albigensians, like, in 1300s that the West, the northern side of the West got into it. And so I wonder what was I wonder what Muhammad's cause was for that. Like, it's not like images are complicated, So I wonder what was his decision, because everything it shows was like, here's a simple saying, I'll get rid of the complicated sayings. Drawing is not complicated. Maybe the act of drawing is complicated, but drawings themselves aren't complicated.
Yeah, I guess the idea of iconography is bound up very much in the incarnation, in making man in our image and likeness, which is like I'd always thought of it as being kind of just like a poetic phrasing thing, but it actually has two distinct meanings: image and likeness, which is kind of like a static and a dynamic. Like like they look like us and act like us, sort of is sort of, maybe it would be a translation. So then Christ being an icon of the Father, and then humanity being icons of the Trinity, having so iconography and it's very bound up with reality. Yeah, which is the most real thing, is the incarnation. So if they're at war with the incarnation, then a natural follow on from that is going to be going to war with iconography.
No, it actually makes sense. That's been my argument against Protestants. They say icons are bad. I'm like, what is Jesus?
Right.
Like, what is he? He's okay. But that actually does make sense. They were against the incarnation because it was complicated or it put too much emphasis on Jesus, or they had to introduce all the other doctrines to explain it. That does make sense, and they got rid of that because it was a byproduct of rejecting the incarnation.
Because the honor that you give a thing passes to the thing that thing is a type of. So so this is part of what the value of iconography is, retaining this again, like tradition being a social memory. If you venerate icons, you're retaining this understanding that when you show honor to a thing, and that thing is an icon of another thing, the act of showing honor to the icon passes to the thing the icon is a type of, or is an icon of. Yeah. So that's where it's a doctrinal thing that is actually, it's not just mere doctrine, so to speak. It's actually like an encoding a fact of reality. You there's no other way of really understanding that absent the practice of icon veneration.
This reminds me of like the whole living memory of tradition saying. The icons are the physical representation of sayings that help not just remind you, but also the existence of the icon itself is a central point that teaches something. And so there's that's interesting. I need to look more into that. Think more about that. I'm gonna be honest, I have no disrespect to icon. I just think some of the Eastern icons aren't my style. I'm very Western, but I will say I like the Byzantine ones. And they're all icons I do find absolutely beautiful. But every time I post about an icon, some Orthodox guy comments about the icon being made by Hindu monks instead of Orthodox monks, and I'm like, dude, I don't know. I'm gonna get him blessed by a priest. Just let me do the priest, and he can. Demons are scared of Mary. Mary will heal the problem. I don't need to know what the Hindus are doing to it. Yeah,
right. It's definitely a thing. There's a particular like iconography studio or whatever that there's even, I've heard rumors, I don't know if all this is true or if it's a consistent thing, but the where they'll create so-called Christian icons, and then they will actually have them blessed by their Hindu deities or something along those lines.
Gross.
So it's like there's a lot of well-meaning Orthodox people that are like, oh, this is a nice icon, and they buy it and they get it, and then they bring it to their priest to be blessed, and the priest is like, oh boy.
Yeah, I really hate the Hindus. There's so much to be said about what I hate. I got into an argument, not an argument, but this disagreement with Zermi of Continentales, because he was saying that Sakana and early Hindu philosophy rationally came to a understanding that reality had to be Trinitarian through the three faces of Atman. And I'm like, but also, hear me out on this one. Wouldn't it also make sense if the devil was trying to create a heresy that would ruin an entire culture of people? You know, because I'm reincarnation is not only stupid. Reincarnation, I believe, is actually an objective evil belief because it turns reality into, well, why you bother trying so hard? It's a World of Warcraft game. You're gonna die and try again, so why bother working hard? And like that's why your people don't have working toilets and shit on the floor because you don't believe in trying. Name one thing, one work of literature, one thing the Hindus have ever produced that had any impact on the rest of the world. It's the Kama Sutra, which is 100 pages of sin, bobs, and cuisine. That's all it is. It's stupid. I refuse to accept anything bad coming out of Hinduism. It is a religion for shitskins, and I refuse to accept anything bad out of it.
It was funny. I was talking to Cooper actually recently. Cooper was talking to a friend of his who's been in programming for like 40 years or something. They were talking about the Pajit problem in the programming world. And he said that he said, if you're like competent and like a go-getter, you have kind of like an entrepreneurial mindset, you don't have to worry about the Pajit programmers, because he said for him, when he's hiring teams of people, he's realized after extensive experience that all of the Pajits are essentially like automation. Like they will do exactly what you ask them to do and no more. There is zero creativity. There's zero like understanding of the broader context of what's happening. There's there's no taking ownership of your project. It's like, you asked for this, you placed an order, and we're going to deliver your order to you. And then that's the relationship is finished. So he said, you're going to get your automation team, which is your not automation team, but your automated team, the team that is just kind of like you put inputs and you get outputs. And then you have your actual like developer team that can actually think about these things more in more complexity.
See, I hear that, but the policy of the gas station still hands me the wrong cigarettes every day. So I haven't. There is one virtue to the Hindus, and that the caste system has primed them to be the new American slave class. Aristotle wrote about natural slaves, and I believe those people are the Hindus.
That's how they eat, at least.
Yeah.
Don't get Jason for the 2-Bit podcast. Don't get him going about the about Indian food and Indian culture and stuff, because it'll be hard to get him to stop.
Is he a fan or does he hate it?
Oh no. Yeah, he feels about them like he does about the idea of going to the beach or wearing shorts. These are all things that he is just constitutionally opposed to. I
need to have him on for an anti-Hindu episode.
Oh yeah.
Dude, one of them would be fun, but Zerad will keep referencing Hindu myths, and I don't fucking care. I don't want to read about Hindu myths. The Vedas, the Vedics, I don't care. I don't want to read about it. Give me the Christian examples. That's what matters. I'm not reading the Hindu. That would actually be fun, because then we can riff about that. Because also, that's why I can't stand Evola. He was Catholic and became Hindu. That is the biggest sin I've seen a human being can commit. That is personally an affront to my existence. That an Italian Catholic would go Hindu. He was schizophrenic and a faggot.
You heard it here, folks. There's a reason evil is in his name.
Exactly. I fucking hate it. I mean, I remember I got into an argument with some guy was like, yoga is demonic worship. And he goes, no, man, it's good for stretching. I'm like, yeah, getting stretched out by demons. What are you, gay? Shut up.
You said yoga. I thought you said yogurt at first. And I was like, yogurt is demonic. That's a new one.
Let's see where he's going with this one.
Yeah. I'm open to it.
We've got an hour and 18 minutes. Let's just call it here.
Okay. Sounds good.
Muhammad's a camera driver. Let's go out there. I'll have to have you back on for a part 2 to wrap it up.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because it's, again, Belloc's chapter, his book on the Reformation, his chapter on Protestantism, all his chapters are just incredible. He has an increasing wide range of books, incredible topics. He has one called Europe in the Face, which is like Europe is the face, basically, is his argument. And it's very, very good. He also, this is so much to say about him, but I don't want to go on forever. But this is the podcast now. I've decided the podcast is devoted to 3 people: Thomas Aquinas. I'm intellectually devoted. Obviously, it's devoted to Jesus, but intellectually devoted. I have to preface that for the Protestants listening. Intellectually devoted: Jacques Maritain, Hilaire Belloc, Thomas Aquinas. That's all. Those are the three people we're going to be focusing on with this podcast.
Well, I found the modern phase, his article about the modern era. I've opened it up here, so I'm going to read through that.
He was the creator of distributism. It was his ideal. He was the first guy to really pioneer distributism. Yeah. He was the one who came up with the name for it and really pioneered it. And even though he named it, he also said, I hate the name. No one likes it, but no one could think of a better name to distributism. Right now, the name everyone's going with is localist, which I think is the best term for it. But also distributism is probably the closest I found to a political philosophy I can actually 100% get behind. That's
interesting. I know very little about it, but I've been thinking about needing to talk to the distributist, invite him on. And maybe that's what I'll do. Maybe I'll have him give us a beginner's guide to distributism.
You're stepping on my turf here, Matt. I thought you were going to say, explain to me like I'm 5. Like, you're stepping on my turf here. I got a friend of mine who's an economist guy, Connor from Twitter, an economist student. He's reading a bunch of like the Pope's encyclicals and Belloc's books and Chesterton's books on to give me an explainment like I'm 5 on it from a strict Catholic economist point of view. So that's going to be fun.
Yeah.
I've decided getting on new people is not only a hassle, there's always a chance it's going to be awkward and terrible. And so I'm not having on new guests anymore.
Just recycle all the old ones.
I'm recycling the same guest over and over again. I have enough friends on Twitter that I know how to vibe with. I'm not having on new people.
Yes, we don't need any immigration in our podcast guest circles.
The exception is Charles Haywood and Dave Distributor. Those are the only people I would actually want to bring on.
Yeah, Charles is great.
I'm gonna tweet out him and Tommy, and I want to get him on for a Cosmit episode, but that means I have to read Cosmit, and I have a thing about not reading Germans.
You could just tell him that. You could say I was going to read Carl Schmitt, but I've got a thing against reading German, so I'll have to have you explain it to me.
I mean, someone DM'd me like, Caleb, what's your argument against Kantianism? I'm like, he's German. That's it. That's the argument. Yeah. Well, Matt, thank you so much for coming on. Where are your plugs? Where can people find you at? What are you doing?
Most often on Twitter at Real Kingpilled. The YouTube channel is Kingpilled. Just look for the big pink guy or pink background with a guy with a beard staring off into the rising sun or something like that. And then also on all the major podcatchers, Apple Podcast or Apple Spotify. Yeah, I think that's probably those are the
go join the Kingpilled Discord because it's awesome.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. We've got a great
that.
I appreciate it. Yeah, subscribestar.com/Kingpilled. You can go join. We've got a lot of good stuff coming on in there. I think we've got something like 60 or 70 people in there now, and we've got some interesting plans that we're putting together. We have an actual crowdsourced project that we're going to be engaging in, producing some particular media content. We'll put it that way. If you guys want to get involved, we're doing it as a cooperative effort because there's no way that I've got like 5 full-time jobs. There's no way I'd possibly be able to do it all myself. So there's a group of us that we're gonna put together this project, and we'd love to have you be involved if you'd like to be. So yeah, subscribestar.com/Kingpilled and come join. And I'm probably in the voice chat in there, I don't know, 3 or 4 times a week, something like that. We'll talk about all kinds of stuff.
Some of the best voice chat conversations I've had have been in the Discord. It is fun. If Jason's in there or you're in there, and I got time, like I won't hop in for just 10 minutes. If I want to hop in, I gotta hop in. Because it's just the conversations go all over the place and it's really fun.
Yeah, right.
It's also fun being like the only Catholic in there.
Yeah, like what? There's like
maybe is Andrew popping at all anymore?
No, ever since his baby was born, he hasn't been around as much.
That should be his priority.
It's overwhelmingly Orthodox, but
yeah, I need backup here, people. Come in.
Yeah.
Come help me out.
We've got some. We've got at least one Calvinist in there. We beat up on him, and then there's some others. There's very much. There's a lot of Orthodox. Actually, Tobias Runk. I think it's Runk.
I know Tobias.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure he's Catholic as well. Yeah. You've got. Oh, and we do have we have a Muslim in there too. I'm waiting to see if I hear from him about this episode.
Oh, that'd be interesting. If he hops into VC, DM me. Let me know.
Okay, I
So
will.
I would love to ask him some questions.
Yeah, he's a good guy.
Um,
He's one of the he's very much one of our guys entirely. He just happens to be Muslim as well.
Yeah, that's my weird thing when it comes to Muslims. Like, I've met some cool Muslims, I've known some cool Muslims, but because of that whole, as long as you maintain belief in your heart when you're the weaker side, for my entire lifetime, Islam's been the weaker side.
Mm.
And so until you're the equal power, I don't know how to trust these people.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what, and I hate that because I want to trust converts. And two, like, oh, you converted, I want to trust you immediately. I don't like that. There's a historical precedent to not trust them.
Mm-hmm.
That's upsetting because I don't. If I find a Muslim convert, like, you converted, let's go, let's have a fun conversation. But I can't know, and that's infuriating.
Vox Clemantis in the chat, he said link, and I assume he's asking about the Discord. You can join the Discord. It's we do have it paywalled because, again, we believe in immigration restriction. So subscribestar.com/kingpilled. You just sign up there, and then you'll get added to the Discord automatically.
Absolutely. Well, everyone, thank you for listening. We have things planned, I'm sure, but I didn't stick with any of the other guys on the podcast to see what they're doing. So like, comment, share, subscribe. I think Bodes and I are doing the next part of the Marathon chapter soon. I'm gonna have Matt back on for finishing this chapter, but I'm also gonna have Jeremy Kubas on for the Albigensian Heresy. Let's see what else. I'm starting with LB Muniz, a book club series on Plato's Republic.
Ooh.
And it's going to be a giant, big book part. I want to have it where it's like Jason's Fender Fed. Just get a bunch of people to hop in. Send the link out to all my friends. Like, you want to hop in, talk about Plato? Hop in.
That'd be awesome.
Plato's Republic is probably the most influential political book ever written.
Mm-hmm.
And so it'd be really fun to get a bunch of guys, like modern political guys, to kind of see, the bits and pieces in Plato that are still around today.
Mm-hmm.
But okay, everyone, like, comment, share, subscribe. We're on Spotify. Check out the Patreon. I will be starting a Thomas Reviews Discord once I get around to caring about it enough to do it, I guess. Yeah, have a good night.